Diplomacia Activa is a freelance organization which aims at generating knowledge, analysis, and formation as regards international politics. Here we have an eminence of U.S. foreign policy in a changing Asia. She is the author of Renegotiating East and Southeast Asia, Regionalism, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, published by Stanford 2009. She was received a U.S. Fulbright Awards for working in Beijing and Singapore. At the University of Delaware, she's a professor there. She teaches courses of Southeast Asia, World Relations and Development, the International Relations of Asia, Chinese Foreign Policy, which is going to teach a course especially about that in the coming year, and Comparative Regionalism. Served as a director of Asian Studies at the University of Delaware from 2009 to 2014, and is currently the Associate Chair of the Department of the Political Science at the university. An eminence in the I'm very glad we have you here.
Or one is just old.
Well, thank you very much for attending here. Today we're going to talk about U.S. foreign policy in Asia. So I had prepared some questions in order to talk about that. First, and updating what we talked on 2023. What has been the national security strategy of Biden in Asia, the NSS, and does culture and geographical distance affect this?
Sure. So, I mean, like the Biden policy towards Asia remains as it was previously, which is that it is very China-oriented, right? So it is very China-oriented, and I think a good way to understand everything that it does in Asia currently is that it is done with an eye toward China. And you can see that in terms of its approaches to alliances, to strategic partnerships. You can see it also in its economic approaches to Asia, although that remains a weaker data point for the Biden administration, I would argue. And so you can see that in multiple ways. So China remains the primary focus of its national security strategy, right? And what the Biden administration calls its Indo-Pacific strategy, which is basically now national strategy, right? So it's very China sensitive. I think to your question about whether or not distance matters, right? So I think, and I think you had 3 points. One was geography, one was culture, and there was a third.
We could add trade. How's trade dynamics going on between the United States and Asia in general?
Right. So I think that there's a little bit of all of that going on, right, as challenges. I think geography, this is why the United States works with partners, right? And so the United States is relying, in fact, if you look at the trend lines, the United States is relying increasingly on allies and partners, okay? Yeah. Partly you could argue that that's geography, but partly I think it's also a question of what the United States is able to do. And so it needs to work with partners, right? And so there is a geographic distance. And one of the challenges for the United States as a geographic question is that all those partners in Asia, all those different states in Asia, all those economies in Asia know that the United States is far away.
Yeah.
Okay? And so you deal with the big power that's in-house. And so the big power that's in-house is, of course, China. And so that's the challenge that the United States has to grapple with. One could argue that some of this is a historic problem for the United States. When you think about, if you study anything about U.S. foreign policy, you will hear recurrently concerns about U.S. credibility.
Yeah.
Right? And U.S. credibility in Asia, at least, I mean, you can talk about credibility in multiple ways, but I think in Asia, partly it's also a question of geography, right? So, so geography does matter. I think the economics also matter in the sense that, even though the United States actually has quite close economic relations with many partners that it's worked, for decades now, right? And has pretty good relations, I would argue, with a good number of states in Asia economically, but their economics are not the same, right?
There's an asymmetry in the economic power.
That's right. So some of it is asymmetry of economic power, no doubt, right? But and if we're going to talk about, just to pick up on the point that you're highlighting, right? There's economic asymmetry, but what, of course, is a bigger challenge for the United States now compared to it was a few decades ago, right? Is that the asymmetry is actually the United States is no longer the only economic game in town.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so previously, when we talk about asymmetry of economic power, the United States had quite a lot of leverage. The United States was truly, right, the biggest actor on the block. And the United States is still a very influential, powerful economic actor. I think we all know that, right? Yeah. But states have different choices now compared to what it used to be. And so the United States is also dealing with that. The point that I wanted to make about economics is that we also have different, the balance, capitalisms look different, right? So, you can still be market-driven economies, but the balance is also different, and so that's always also been a little bit of a disconnect between the United States and these other countries that have prioritized kind of developmental economics, right? I think, and then I'll conclude with this point, and just to simply say, and we talked a little bit about this in our class last year, but the United States, of course, its own economics is also changing, right? And so you actually see it adopting, some policies that you wouldn't have thought it embracing, in the past, and so they are more state-led kinds of policies, right? There are policies that are, that are, for lack of a better word, fall in the realm of more industrial policy. And that's partly because the United States sees what other states have also seen, right? Is that sometimes in order to develop certain areas that you're weak in, you need the state. And so you see this a little bit going on in the United States as well.
So just turning on the point you just said, you would argue or say that the fact that China rise and is a very powerful state in the region makes a more reliable or more important state than the United States, because of all what you said, the geographical distance, and also I think about the cost of transactions. Maybe could it be that also?
So I wouldn't characterize China as necessarily more important, right? But I would say that for all the states in Asia, it is the state that cannot be ignored, right? And I think, and there's a mix of different approaches in Asia, and this is, of course, what the United States, from a U.S. foreign policy standpoint, this is also complicates what the United States wants to do, because you really do have kind of a range of states, and so, it works very well, with, Japan, for example, but maybe, the economies in Southeast Asia are more ambivalent. And so, you do have that kind of a complexity in terms of the United States there. I think in terms of your question, is China more important? Like I said, I wouldn't characterize it that, but I would say that China is very important, and it may be equally important, right? So they're important in different ways. Okay, so, China remains, the most important trade partner of most of these states. Okay, and the expectation is that China will remain an important trade partner of these states. If you look at, and these are states, so the important thing to understand about these economies, and again, this is where there's a little bit of a contrast with the United States and what it is able to do in its economy, is that these economies rely on these other markets. Okay, the United States is a very large market. There's only a few countries in the world that can rely on its own markets.
Yeah.
Okay. And even that we could debate, right? But the United States has size in ways that other economies don't. China has size in ways that other economies don't, right? India also, right, has that kind of size. But but given the trend lines, right? There are trend lines in the U.S. market. The U.S. market has been extremely critical to all these economies in Asia. The Asian economies have grown in part, right, because of access to the U.S. market. The U.S. market has been the most important economic relationship, but it is now no longer that kind of partner, right? I mean, it's not offering markets. Its initiatives are not about trade, right? And so these become sources of concern, and that makes China more important.
Would you characterize Biden's government in a way that confirms this tendency of not maybe a trade war, but dealing with the fact that U.S. influence in Asia needs to be preserved, and it is clearly an important fact that China doesn't expand more over the globe,
right,
in terms of economic influence and trade influence. I'm thinking about the tariffs that Biden puts in
right.
on China's products, and
just introduced a few more.
yeah.
So I mean, I think you're right about that. I think so. You make basically 2 points, right? I mean, the first point that you started off with is that Asia has become very central. Okay, so Asia has become central to U.S. foreign policy and national security and strategy in ways that it hadn't been previously. It's always been important, but it hasn't had this kind of centrality. And of course, the reason for this centrality is China, right? Because China is a rival power. Okay. And so that's a very different, now that China's emergence as this more comprehensive, influential power is a concern in the United States, for various reasons, and so that has elevated the priority of Asia. The challenge for the United States is that the United States remains, as we know, also concerned about credibility and commitments in other parts of the world. Okay. And so what the administrations, so I mean, we can skip the Trump administration, but certainly we look at what the Obama administration tried to do and what the Biden administration has tried to do. Their Asia priority has been complicated by other crises and wars and challenges in other parts of the world that they also are concerned about, right? Whereas China is quite clear, Asia's number one for it.
My next question, that because of all the international conflicts where the United States is involved in its international agenda, such as the Ukrainian and Russian war and the conflict of Palestinians and Israel.
Right.
I'm going to ask you, how would you describe the Indo-Pacific strategy deployed by the Biden's government, and if you think that in an eventual Trump's assumption, this would change?
There will be differences in terms of their policies, right? I think, at very least, it will contrast in terms of the predictability of policy, right? I think, I think, Trump's temperament is to be more impulsive, right? And also maybe less discriminating. Okay? If you remember, if you look at, the U.S. has a large trade deficit. It's not just with China, but obviously China's the biggest one. Okay. So, and so if you remember from the Trump administration, well, he just leveled tariffs on everybody. I mean, so will he do that again? I don't know. And so Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy, Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy will have more partners. Okay. Biden's strategy has very much emphasized partners. Okay. I mean, like, I would argue that that's one of the most defining features of the Biden administration. Okay. It's not, but when I say partners, it's not multilateralism. Okay. But it's partners.
You're talking about allies.
I'm talking about allies, and I'm talking about these new kind of mini-lateral groupings, right? The Quadrilateral Security Agreement, the AUKUS. There's other trilateral moves that it's also been making, right? So, but it's been very much emphasizing partners, right? And again, in my view, at least part of that has to do with the fact that it is the United States cannot do it by itself. And so it needs to rely on these other states to basically do more. Okay. The United States wants everybody to do more. Okay. And because Biden's is more of a conventional actor, the administration, and the states feel comfortable working with the Biden administration, he's not lashing out at them, right? Arguably, it's a more successful policy because he has partners to work with. It's not clear whether the Trump administration is able to do the same, right? I mean, if his track record from the last administration is any indication, then likely not. Okay, we don't know what will happen in a different Trump administration. You know, I mean, I will not bet money on anything. I think, you know, he likes the unpredictability.
So I'm going to refresh some of the topics we were chatting about, that course that we had on February. Was February, no? Not.
It was I think February. That's right. I think it was February.
And we talked a lot about Taiwan. So I wanted to ask you first, just to introduce and for the general public, is there a consent between the between Republicans and Democrats about agreeing in protecting Taiwan right to be sovereign? And how does the relationship with the Northeast Asian countries develop during the Biden's presidency?
Okay, well, those are two very different and big questions.
Yes.
So I think the Taiwan question, I think I would put it a little bit differently, right? I mean, I think on the Taiwan question that there is a debate in the United States right now. Okay. I don't know whether I would characterize it as a debate between Republicans and Democrats, though, on this one. I think that there is a larger discussion about specifically the question of strategic ambiguity. Okay. So, you know, the question of strategic ambiguity is what you will promise absolutely to do or not to do. Right.
Okay.
Right. And so we've always left it ambiguous. And so, and ambiguity served a purpose, right? It serves as a deterrent for all actors, right? So not just China, but actually historically also Taiwan, by the way, right? It's saying that, you know, we don't promise one thing or another, right? So, you know, so, and that kind of kept everybody in check. Okay. China doesn't know whether we do something or not, right? Taiwan doesn't know whether we do something or not. And so everybody is more conservative. I think if you look at US policy, we do see a trend, right, where the United States has become much more vocal about defending Taiwan. We see this, right? I mean, we see it in both actions, we see it in words, you know, we see it in diplomacy, right? I mean, that's pretty clear. But the debate is, you know, to what extent does the United States, you know, support, right, in independent Taiwan, for example, right? So, you know, and so you can see, right, this is why, you know, many, you know, even Biden himself, if you remember, right, Biden not too long ago, and some people criticized him for this, right? So Biden not too long ago said that we do not support an independent Taiwan, okay? And that was a way to kind of reassure China that we are not agitating for Taiwan's independence. You know, on the other hand, right, and this is where the messiness of U.S. politics comes in. You may have also noticed that we've had congressional delegations, right? Yeah. You know, meeting with the Taiwanese government, you know, expressing their support. They had an election. Not That's right. That's right. And, and so you also see these differences, and if you'll remember also that congressional delegation, it's both Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
So, and so again, I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as a Republican versus Democrat debate, but I think that there is a debate about what the United States should explicitly commit to, right? And what is the best strategy, right? Because ambiguity is also strategy. Okay, so ambiguity is not a non-strategy, but the debate is whether or not that works.
But nowadays, you would characterize that the prominent strategy is the ambiguously strategy.
I think that it is still strategic ambiguity, but I would argue that it's also less ambiguous than it used to be.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes. I think that, I also agree that there's a more, not a shift, but from Biden's administration, more of a feeling towards Taiwan that is also shown with what you just told. And just maybe concluding this conversation, I was thinking, we were as a team thinking about the future, about this this Indo-Pacific strategy. We also did talk about this, but I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the relationship with Xi Jinping that Biden had during the administration? And here we have a lot of possibilities, because as you just told us, we just don't know the future.
No.
But eventually, if Trump wins in November, would you think, how would you think that this relationship would change or shift, or also think about the foreign policy? But yes, the relationship between the US and Xi Jinping.
I'm not certain that it would change that much, right? I mean, I mean, the Biden administration is not making special effort, to work with Xi Jinping, I would argue. Okay. So I think it's good, obviously, that the administration is now talking to the Chinese. I mean, if you remember, we had this long period where they were not talking. And so I think, I think it's good that we see more dialogue right now. We see them at least talking, even though they're arguing, they're at least talking.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a good thing, but I'm not sure that, and so because that relationship is difficult, I'm not sure that the relationship with Xi Jinping himself, right? I mean, because this is the question, you're not asking about China relations, you're asking about the relationship with Xi Jinping, right?
Just it's more a political question, like
right. So I think, I'm not sure it would change that much, but it's difficult to know, right? Because I think with as we know, I mean, Trump, he really liked Putin, right?
Yeah.
And if a person knows how to work with Trump, then maybe it'll be better relations, right? So let me put it this way. A relationship between Biden and Xi Jinping is likely to be strained, and that will not change. Okay? With respect to the relationship between Trump and Xi Jinping, who knows?
Exactly.
Right? I mean, but, again, there's a lot of sentiment in the United States that is very critical of Xi Jinping. I mean, I think there's actually, it's a consensus that a lot of the issues with China are also about Xi Jinping. So in that sense, to the extent that Trump will feel constrained, that could be a constraint.
And last but not least, ASEAN is a very economical, important group, international group. How would you characterize the influence they have in Asia? And do you see in the future any international trade treaty between the US and more Asian countries?
Right. So you're talking about the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think so two questions that you ask. I think ASEAN's role in the region is limited. Okay.
Mhm.
So it's limited in the sense that, it isn't an organization. It has never been an organization that solves conflicts. Okay. But it is an organization that provides important platforms for difficult actors to meet and also partner with other states. Okay. So that's ASEAN's role in the region. To your second question, and I'll just conclude, and let me just say one more thing about that. I think that there have been lots of concerns about whether or not ASEAN's influence will become more limited. And that partly is because, US-China tensions are so bad. And also because ASEAN itself, as you may know, is dealing with a very difficult conflict in Myanmar, which affects its own internal organization. With respect to your second question, whether or not we will see trade agreements. So ASEAN, where ASEAN has, I think, made an important impact. Okay, so here's a different way to kind of think about ASEAN's influence. ASEAN, was instrumental in spearheading the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. That's the largest free trade agreement in the world. Okay, the United States is outside of two of the world's biggest trade agreements, right? I mean, the only one that it's part of is the Mexico-Canada-US one, right? But it is not part of RCEP, which ASEAN again played a critical role in creating. Partly, I mean, in the conclusion of RCEP, that was partly also in response, to some of the trade tensions and dynamics that were taking place, right? So it's basically what ASEAN does. So, just to kind of say that, ASEAN's influence may be limited, but it does have an influence. RCEP is a good example of an alternative, right? In the context of all this fighting and trade tensions and decoupling efforts, RCEP is a proposal being put forward that is trying to create a different alternative than division. Okay. But we are not going to see the United States sign on to RCEP. Okay. I do not think that the United States will be signing on to CPTPP. The Biden administration hasn't even touched it, right? It won't even touch, in order to sign a trade agreement, it actually needs like trade promotion authority. It has not even tried to pursue renewing TPA because that's a congressional question. It has not done it.
Why do you think that Congress are so reluctant to these trade agreements?
I think this is partly because, I mean, the United States is turning more inward. The United States, and then partly this has to do with, I mean, to be quite frank, it's about the economic competitiveness. And so there are many people that believe that trade has hurt them. And, as we also know, I think, trade agreements are all, trade agreements are very complicated, right? So trade agreements, it is true, trade agreements don't help everyone.
There are winners and losers.
There are definitely winners and losers. And so there's a lot of people that believe that they have been losers, right? And so there is now on both, and the difference today compared to what it used to be is that it used to be that Republicans argued for free trade. Today, Republicans do not argue for free trade. Okay, Democrats remain the same, actually, very critical of many of these trade agreements because of human rights questions, labor questions. Okay, but that's a historic Democratic stance. Republicans today do not defend these trade agreements.
There's going a shift between how open the United States wants to be with their partners and in their interference with the rest of the globe. But yeah, to finish this talk, I would like to thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to add?
No, it's just except to say it was a pleasure talking to you, and happy to revisit some very important policy questions. And we will all hope that relations improve. And that also, I mean, that all our countries do well. So
Yes.
yours
We
and
hope
mine, right?
you need to come to visit us here in Argentina.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, again, I remember just what a lovely group, and I will always remember the shirt that you gave me. So thank you very much. I still have it. In fact, I just laundered it recently. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Alice. Thank you for your time and for all the facts and your opinion, your specialized opinion about the region of Asia, to apport your know-how about the dynamics that are going on in Asia. And well, just to finish, as we say here in Diplomacia Activa, the world needs us awake. El mundo nos necesita atentos.